All right, now let's speak to Joselynn Fember, attorney and managing partner at Fember Attorneys. Thank you so much for your time, Joselynn. Help us make sense of several things that transpired in court and, of course, outside court, where, again, bombshells were thrown, this week. In fact, let's start with defense attorney Maliselat for calling for the cross-examination of the first witness to actually be halted, and him wanting to resume a trial within a trial, given how his clients, accused 1 to 4, were treated. Help us make sense of what he is trying to do.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It certainly has been an extremely eventful week in court. And I think just before I get into the issue of a trial within a trial, for some perspective, it's important for people to remember that this trial is only in its second week. We've just come back from a very long adjournment, which will probably happen again soon. And I think that it's very clear what the defense attorneys are trying to establish, but to draw conclusions from what has happened so far would be very premature. And I think in a trial of this nature, as you said, there will be all sorts of things that will come up as it progresses, both inside and outside of court. But in the grand scheme of things, the judge will examine the evidence as a whole. So if one witness is found not to be credible, it might not have an effect on the entire case. It might as well. But that's why I think it's premature to draw absolute conclusions from the evidence given so far. Insofar as the request for a trial within a trial is concerned, just to explain those proceedings. In those proceedings, an accused person would raise a query regarding the admissibility of certain evidence that would have been admissible in the trial otherwise. And in this instance, we heard Advocate Maliselat Tefo say that his clients were tortured and a confession emanated as a result of that torture. And that speaks to the admissibility of that evidence. But what the judge had said was that submissions cannot be made from the bar by counsel in respect of those proceedings. And that's why he rejected the request and the trial was ordered to proceed. Had Advocate Tefo made an application by way of a notice of motion together with a founding affidavit containing evidence from the accused person explaining why there would be merit in having a trial within a trial, I think that the outcome would potentially have been different. So in respect of the evidence given during the confession that was alleged to have happened, if a trial within a trial does proceed, those proceedings would be ring-fenced. In other words, evidence given by the accused within those proceedings would not be used in the main trial. They are ring-fenced, so to speak.
Now, you mentioned, the integrity of a witness, obviously in this case being exposed during cross-examination, and that it's still early days. It is the second week, as you say, so far. But what can we draw from just the testimony that is being given by the first witness, Sergeant Thabo Mosia, particularly as it relates to cross-examinations by the defense attorneys, and how that exposes the contamination of that scene, back in 2014?
Yes, so every crime scene tells a story, which is why it's of utmost importance that proper crime scene management is implemented to prevent the destruction of any evidence that might be found at a scene. We have heard from both Advocate Maliselat Tefo as well as Advocate Mshololo, who's acting on behalf of accused number 5, that certain questions were asked during the course of cross-examination, which unfortunately, Sergeant Thabo Mosia could not account for. An example of this is the chain of custody within which the exhibits had moved. It was raised by Advocate Mshololo that, for example, the exhibits that were collected at the crime scene were not checked into evidence, and that the clerk was not available to check that evidence in. And what came out in cross-examination was not presented in Sergeant Mosia's evidence in chief, and that was that the evidence did not go straight into the evidence room. It instead went into Sergeant Mosia's personal safe. Now, as much as that might not be unusual, that sometimes the clerk might not be available, what was required of Sergeant Mosia in terms of our criminal procedure was that he was meant to document the movement of those exhibits. And I think that in the beginning of this trial, Mosia said that the scene evidently showed that, for example, there'd been a fight in the house. But he did say initially that the integrity of the scene was maintained and that it was not tampered with, and that he verily believed that the victims merely delayed reporting the matter in time because of the fact that time was of the essence, and etc. But both counsel for the accused during cross-examination have tested this version, and it does not look good because there are moments of events which, like I said, he is unable to account for. And conclusions may be drawn from this insofar as the reliability and the credibility of his evidence is concerned. And I think it's important to understand that Sergeant Musia is a critical witness. He is a forensic field worker who was supposed to be the first person on the crime scene, but it also was revealed during cross-examination that when he arrived at the crime scene, so he actually attended the hospital before he arrived at the crime scene, and when he arrived, there were already police officers on the scene. It was not cordoned off. It didn't appear to be preserved, and I think both counsel were trying to allude to the fact that this crime scene was not a true reflection of what had actually happened prior to Sergeant Musia's arrival on the scene.
And of course, we talked about tensions arising again on the sidelines of of this case. Singer Khumalo, Kelly Khumalo's lawyer, hitting back on accusations made in court by Advocate Defo. When he said that he will be bringing in a witness who will actually say that it was in fact Kelly Khumalo who fired that shot that ultimately killed Senzo Meyiwa, and she did that, of course, accidentally. Of course, the utterances made by Kelly Khumalo's lawyer, Ms. Monsami, were also condemned as unethical. Talk to us about what transpired there. What was her reaction then expected to be at this point in time?
So I think in a matter of this nature, where there's such an enormous amount of public interest in the matter, and also where the state has and the defense have deliberately not named their witnesses to preserve their safety and to prevent a situation where a witness would subjectively feel intimidated by, for example, the threat of litigation, I think it would have been responsible for Ms. Monsami to perhaps reserve her client's comments on that, because as much as we could say that she was simply relaying her client's instructions, I think that a certain measure of conservatism insofar as that is required, considering what I've just said about witnesses and just preserving the integrity of the trial is concerned. I think it would have been better just to not make threats of litigation.
Of course, as we wrap up this conversation, talk us through what is likely to happen when the trial resumes on Monday.
So when the trial resumes, I'm not sure if Advocate Mshololo is done cross-examining the first witness, but as soon as the cross-examination ends, it's very certain that the state will call its next witness, and then the process will resume again with that witness leading evidence in chief, that witness being cross-examined and also being re-examined by the state. The other possibility is that Advocate Malisela Tefo could actually bring that application for a trial within a trial, which is an interlocutory application to happen. And if that happens, then the trial might actually be adjourned until the outcome of that trial within a trial is determined. As we've seen, there are several bombshells which often show up in court during the proceedings. So we don't know which applications will be brought by either the state or by Advocate Malisela Tefo, but it would be interesting to just keep our eyes peeled and to see what happens next in those proceedings.
Of course, Joselynn, so much to discuss about what transpired, but we'll leave it for next week. As you say, I'm sure we can expect more bombshells to be revealed during that trial. Thank you so much, Joselynn Fember, for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.